Now that we've got factoring out of the way, we're going to jump into our first new lesson of isolation algebra. That is 9.4. And surprise, 9.4 has to do with factoring. We are going to be factoring to solve quadratic equations. So here we're going to be using factoring to solve. Let's get started with a start thinking. If we have two numbers multiplied together, let's say we had x times y is equal to 0. So if we have two numbers that are multiplied together to equal 0, what must be true about one of the numbers? So let's think about this for a second. If x times y equals 0, we need to figure out what multiplies to make 0. So if you think 1 and -1, then we don't get 0. If you try any set of numbers, you don't get 0. But we do know anything times what equals 0? Anything times 0. So we know that x or y has to equal 0, because the only thing that you can multiply by to get 0 is 0. This is actually an important property here. This is called the zero product property. And this is something that you will use throughout here and through Algebra 2. What the zero product property says is if you have two numbers that are multiplied together to equal 0, then one of them has to equal 0, or the other one has to equal 0. Same thing as what we just stated here. Why is this important? Well, let's say you have two factors. Let's say you have x plus 3 and x plus 2, right? You've factored some quadratic, so you get x plus 3 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. What this means is that x plus 3 is equal to 0, or x plus 2 is equal to 0. So this allows us to break up something over multiplication so we can solve for x. Let's do a couple of examples of this. Let's look at one. Let's say we're looking for the solutions to 4t plus 1 times t minus 2 is equal to 0. So if we're looking at this, this tells us by that property that either 4t plus 1 is equal to 0, or t minus 2 is equal to 0. So now we just solve for t. We do 4t, we subtract 1, and we get 4t is equal to minus 1, or we add 2, this becomes t is equal to positive 2. We can keep solving for t here. We divide by 4, we get t is equal to -1/4, or t is equal to 2. So we just solved a quadratic that was factored by splitting this up and looking at both of our terms and setting them equal to 0. Let's do that with another. Let's say you have 2x times x minus 3 is equal to 0. So once again, we have two things multiplied together equal to 0. This becomes 2x is equal to 0, or x minus 3 is equal to 0. Divide by 2, we get x is equal to 0 divided by 2 is still 0, or add 3, we get x is equal to positive 3. This is the basic idea. We're going to expand this a little bit by trying to solve when we have something in a quadratic form. So here are our steps for solving with a b term. We'll use as an example x squared plus 15 is equal to minus 8. x. Your first step is going to be, you want to get one of your sides equal to 0. So let's go ahead and do that like we were doing when we were solving. So what do? We add 8x to both sides. We get x squared plus 8x plus 15 is equal to 0. Step 2 is going to be factor your quadratic. So a times c, 1 times 15, we're looking for factors of 15 that add up to 8. We find that that's 5 and 3. So we're going to factor this. We get x squared plus 5x plus 3x plus 15 is equal to 0. We're going to keep bringing this 0 down to remind us that it's there. Put those in parentheses, factor an x out, we're left with x plus 5. Factor a 3 out, we're left with x plus 5 is equal to 0. So this becomes x plus 5 times x plus 3 is equal to 0. And now we see this is the same as those previous examples, right? We had two things multiplied together that equal 0. So step 3 is going to be set each term equal to 0. So this becomes x plus 5 is equal to 0, or x plus 3 is equal to 0. Step 4 is going to be solve. Right, subtract 5, we get x is equal to minus 5, or subtract 3, we get x is equal to minus 3. So that's how you solve when you have a b value. Let's do one that's a little bit harder. We're going to have some value for a, so this is where we have to factor the long way. It makes our life a little bit more of a pain. Let's say you have 4x squared minus 21x is equal to 18. Step 1, get everything over to one side. We're going to subtract 18 to get one side equal to 0. Step 2 is to factor. So we're looking for factors of a times c, which is going to be, if we put that into a calculator, negative 72, that add up to be b, which is negative 21. So we're looking for factors of negative 72 that add up to negative 21. Let's run through the list because we're not sure what happens here. So we try negative 72 and positive 1 doesn't work. We try negative 36 and positive 2. That gets us closer, but we're not quite there. So let's try dividing by 3. Divide 72 by 3, we get negative 24. We get 3. Negative 24 plus 3 adds up to 21. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to rewrite this as negative 4x squared minus 24x plus 3x minus 18 is equal to 0. Put those into parentheses and factor out. Now we have 4x squared and minus 24x. We can pull a 4 and an x out of those. What are we left with? Well, we're left with an x here. 24 divided by 4 gives us minus 6. Over here, what can we pull out? Well, we pull out a 3. So we're left with x, and 18 divided by 3 gives us minus 6 is equal to 0. Both of these terms are the same, meaning that this becomes x minus 6 times 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. Now we're going to separate these into two different parts. So we get x minus 6 is equal to 0, or 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. We add 6, we get x is equal to 6, or we subtract 3, we get 4x is equal to minus 3. So our two solutions are x is equal to 6, or when we divide by 4, we get x is equal to negative 3/4. That's all it is for the lesson today, folks. So your steps, make sure you set one side equal to 0. Then you're going to factor all the way out until you get to the simplified form. Set each of the factors equal to 0 and then solve for x. Let's get you on to some practice. Right, we're going to have a lot of practice problems here, so make sure you do them. Going to be similar style problems on the homework. First two problems, actually just the first problem, is going to ask you what are the solutions to, we have x plus 3 times 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. Next problem, and this is going to be true for all of the rest of the problems, or the next three, you're going to solve. So the first one's going to be x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. Problem 3 is going to be 6x squared plus x minus 2 is equal to 0. And problem 4 is going to be 3x squared plus 5x is equal to 8x. Then your last problem, I want you to write an equation that has solutions x is equal to 1 and x is equal to minus 2. This one's going to be a little bit more difficult. This is just working in reverse from what we did for the steps, right? We have our two solutions. We're just going to do the steps in reverse. So go ahead and get going with those, and we'll meet back up when you're finished. Go do them. All right, let's get back. I'm going to rewrite each of these because I didn't leave myself enough room, but hopefully you did. Starting with problem 1. It's asking us what are the solutions to x plus 3 times 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. So we split this up. We get x plus 3 is equal to 0, or 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract 3, we get x is equal to minus 3, or add 4, we get 2x is equal to 4. I'm going to have to divide by 2, so this becomes x is equal to 2, or x is equal to minus 3. Problem 2 says we have to solve for x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. So what are our factors of negative 12 that add up to minus 1? Well, that's going to be negative 4 and positive 3 is going to equal negative 1. So we're going to add those in. We get x squared minus 4x plus 3x minus 12 is equal to 0. And factor that. Pull out an x, we're left with x minus 4. Pull out a 3, we're left with x minus 4 is equal to 0. Our two terms on the inside are good, are the same, so we're all good. We get x minus 4, x plus 3 is equal to 0, and then we split this up. And solve. So we get x is equal to minus 3, or x is equal to 4. Problem 3. So for problem 3, we had 6x squared plus x minus 2 is equal to 0. We're looking for factors of negative 12 that add up to be positive 1. Looking back at the previous problem, that's just going to be flipped, so we're going to have 4 and negative 3 is equal to 1. Now we do this, we get 6x squared plus 4x minus 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. We pull out a 2x from this. What are we left with? Well, we get 3x plus 2. Now what do these two terms have in common? Well, they're both subtracted. So remember, if that happens, we can pull out a minus 1. And we're left with 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. Or this becomes 2x minus 1 times 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. Split this up. So we get 2x minus 1 is equal to 0, or 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. And solve. This is 2x is equal to 1, or 3x is equal to negative 2. And that becomes x is equal to 1/2, or x is equal to negative 2/3. Right, problem 4. We're given 3x squared plus 5x is equal to 8x. What do we have to do? Well, we have to make sure that this is equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 8x, and this becomes 3x squared minus 3x is equal to 0. Notice how we don't have a constant term, so we'd be looking for factors of 0 that add up to negative 3. Doesn't really work, so remember, this is one of the ones where we're going to factor out just from here. What do we have left? Well, both these terms have a 3 and an x. So let's pull those out, and what are we left with? X minus 1 is equal to 0. Now this is the same thing. We have two terms that are multiplied together. So this becomes 3x is equal to 0, or x is equal to x minus 1 is equal to 0. Divide, we get x is equal to 0, or x is equal to positive 1. All right, let's go on to the last problem. Problem 5. Now we have something where we know x is equal to 1 and x is equal to minus 2. We're effectively doing the steps in reverse. So what do we have to do? Well, we want to get one side equal to 0. We get x minus 1 is equal to 0, and x plus 2 is equal to 0. Right? We're just taking the steps and we're flipping it back so we get something is equal to 0. Why were these equal to 0? Well, because the multiplication of the two of them was equal to 0. And now all we have to do is FOIL these back out. So we get x squared plus 2x minus x minus 2 is equal to 0. Or if we simplify that, this becomes x squared plus x minus 2 is equal to 0. All right, go ahead and get started with your homework.